everybody, and welcome to Taking Control, the ADHD podcast on Rash Pixel FM. I'm Pete Wright, and I'm right here with Nikki Kinzer. Hello, Nikki Kinzer.
Hello, Pete Wright. Hello, everyone. Welcome.
How are you? You feeling good? You feeling strong?
I am.
Kung Fu?
Fu, that's right. Yes, absolutely.
Way of the fist?
With a fist, with another
Way
fist.
of the dragon. There's a lot of the way of the mongoose.
Twist,
way of the squirrel.
Turn, yeah.
Way of the squirrel. Speaking of squirrels, we have merch. You got to check out the new Squirrel podcast shirt in our TeePublic store, which is out. And I haven't even said anything about it, and people have found it and are purchasing the Squirrel podcast, supporting this show, which I think
fantastic.
Is a hoot.
They're pretty cute.
It's really adorable.
Good job on that, Pete.
Well, thank you very much. It's super fun, and I put up some other stuff in there. You can get stickers, you can get mugs, whatever you want. It's over on TeePublic. We have a very special guest. Caroline Maguire is back today. Her book is really and truly out, and we are very excited to talk to her about it, and so much more. Before we do that, head over to TakeControlADHD.com. You can get to know us a little bit better. You can listen to the show right there on the website, or subscribe to the mailing list, and we will, of course, send you a note. Just a wee note, a missive, every time a new episode is released. You can connect with us on Twitter or Facebook at Take Control ADHD. And if this show has ever touched you, we invite you to consider making smart financial decisions and then supporting us by joining the ADHD community over on Patreon, patreon.com/the ADHD podcast. For a few bucks, you could be watching us on YouTube on a very hidden members-only link, watching the live recording of this podcast, which generally we do something I do something stupid that lives on in history that is edited out of the rest of the live podcast. You never hear that if you aren't a part of the members only community.
It's not only you, Pete. I've edited a lot on the show.
So if you're the kind of person who's interested in the BTS, the behind the scenes stuff, then you need to consider at least joining the ADHD podcast community at patreon.com/the ADHD podcast. To all those who are currently members, we thank you for your support. To all those who are still considering it, what are you waiting for? Check it out. Patreon.com/the ADHD podcast. We appreciate your support. ADHD coach Caroline Maguire is back. Coach, author, teacher, and speaker with a special focus on social skills supporting kids and parents of kids with ADHD. Her book is out now. Huzzah! Why No One Will Play With Me, the Play Better plan to help children of all ages make friends and thrive. And we're thrilled that she's back to talk to us today about social success. Caroline, where have you been all my life?
I have been all over America. I have been everywhere.
That's so exciting. Look at you. You're a globetrotter.
I have seen airports that I never thought that I would see. I now am like expert at, packing only one bag. I do not check my bag now. My consultant husband is so happy with me. I did see Nikki at the international conference. I looked at her from across the room while I had the giggles, and one of the speakers was telling me that I was too happy or something. He was very
Wait
funny.
a minute. No, that's not a thing you do as a speaker.
No, he was.
Why did
And he was a funny speaker,
and
too.
I was laughing.
He was funny.
Like, pipe down over there, but he's actually a friend of mine. But no,
Okay.
I've been everywhere. I've been all over America.
Well,
Yeah.
It is very exciting. We've had the last time we had John, I don't know, it was several months ago, and the book was pending release, and I don't know that we had the final date, and now it's out, and it's very exciting. Congratulations!
Thank you so much. It is great. It is. It's really it's pretty wonderful to be able to share this with so many families, and I have really, I give speeches and people like sob in the audience, and the venue is like, what's happening? And I said, people are really, this is a big issue for people, for their kids, for their teens, for their 25-year-old who's still at home. And so it's really powerful. And I'm enjoying, sharing this with everyone.
Well, it's such a different take on things too, because a lot of times when you get an ADHD book, for parenting or for children with ADHD, it's sort of like an accommodations or diagnosis or academic point of view, but you don't always see the social piece of it. So it is definitely something that we're not talking a lot about. So your book is bringing that into people's attention, which I think is great. And we know they're struggling.
Right. Well, While No One Play With Me is unique because, first it's everybody. It's not just ADHD folks. It's diagnosed, undiagnosed, anyone. But it's also unique because it is completely prescriptive. It's a yellow brick road. It's not me telling you what the problem is, which as a mom, that drives me nuts. Like if I get a babysitter and I go hear a speaker, please don't tell me that like my child is a lefty and they need, OT. Like, okay, I knew that already. Like I'm living with her serial killer handwriting. Tell me what to do. So, it is unique and it's not something we talk about enough. I think the outpouring is because While No One Play With Me satisfies a need because people do not talk about the social aspect. They talk about the academics.
So for the people that didn't listen to the show before where you talked about the book, can you do just a quick review of what it is about? I mean, I know we're saying social, but let's just go into a little bit more detail.
Yeah, no, absolutely. So While No One Play With Me is a guide, and it helps parents learn to use the coaching technique of open-ended questions and reflective listening and to have conversations with your child about social skills. It also is a prescriptive book. So it is a yellow brick road of how do you introduce this topic? How do you teach a child new social skills? How do you know what social skills to focus on, what to let go, what to talk about? And it's full of like scripts. So, I gave a speech Saturday and, every time I give a speech, somebody raises their hand and says, well, what if I notice things my kid or teen is doing and I need to tell them like, hey, you don't have great self-awareness, but I notice, that you nag people until they literally physically withdraw from you. And so I have scripts of how to bring that up in a coaching session or a conversation as a parent, but not crush their soul, right? So how do you bring that up? What do you let go? How do you do it in a way that allows the child to talk about it and not, causes World War III? That's what While No One Play With Me is. It's really this roadmap, this playbook for parents to let them teach the social skills because we're there day in, day out.
Well, and I just have to say, I had some time to read it or read through it and look at some of the exercises, some of the coaching things that you do there with the questions. And you give the language to the parents, which is just so good. Because we don't know what the language is without, hurting their soul. Sometimes we say things we regret, right? So it really is, it's a fantastic book. And I'm thrilled that you're here again. So we are going to talk about a very specific topic. We're going to talk about the 7 things that everyone needs to do to be socially successful. So tell us what these 7 things are. And then how they apply.
I did a bunch of research and my own anecdotal experience of like, what do you pay attention to? What are the things we all need? So let me just frame this up for 2 seconds, which is that 70% of people don't succeed in the workplace because they don't fit into the culture. And we always hear, it's the fit, right? And the fit is really social skills. It's what we don't say, but if you look at what people define fit as, it's your communication, it's your ability to do these 7 things. So I came up with these 7 things also because parents and adults are always saying to me, like, well, what do I have to have? What do I have to focus on? What matters? And so I wanted people to sort of have, at the end of the day, here's the 7 things you need to be able to do. So that's just like my framing of the context. So it is manage your emotions rather than them manage you. It is to read the room. It is to meet people halfway. It is to read social cues and unspoken rules and sort of be able to figure out people's facial expressions, body language. It is to also learn to walk in someone else's shoes, take perspective. It is to also be adaptive, which I resemble this remark. That's not always easy for
Yeah.
And it is also to know your audience. So who are you talking to? Why do you need to adapt to them? And I can go into more about this, but just, you're adapting your communication style to who you're talking to.
It's, that, I mean, yeah, you nailed it in, I guess, 7. I'm so much of the sort of the tone of all of these, at least as I apply it to myself, nails this sort of natural social belligerence that I have to constantly be on guard for, where especially this sort of meet me halfway or meet people halfway bit, where it's, if I'm left to my, at my my natural instincts, I know that I am going to come off as naturally socially selfish. And that's a thing that I'm constantly having to say in my head is, when you say you read the room, I mean, that's language that's in my internal script constantly. How would you like to approach these? If you want to go through them point by point, or maybe give some examples of how to reprogram that script so that you can actually accomplish these things.
Yeah. I mean, I think a lot of these things go back to self-regulation and emotional regulation. And so there's a lot of these things, just to validate you, Pete, that we all struggle with. And we all struggle with too, depending on our level of fatigue, our level of excitement, our level of anger, like all of the emotional piece. I think one of the things I do want to say, and then I'll definitely go into them piece by piece or whatever you guys want, is, for ADDers, there's some people who don't know what to do. And then there's some people who just can't do what they know. And so there's also this sort of, I always feel like there's this like self-regulation hangover where sometimes we just don't have the ability to present as we want to. And although we might nail all 7 of these on another day, on that particular day, these 7 things don't happen, and it all goes back to emotional and self-regulation. So, part of this is to know those underlying issues are driving it for you or not. But I mean, that's partly, Pete, what I hear you saying about the script.
Yeah, you just said something that I want to highlight. And in fact, I literally highlighted it in my notes here, that with ADHDers, there's this difference between how sometimes we don't know what to do versus we can't do what we do know how to do, right? That we don't know what to do in a social situation versus not being able to rightfully equip the tools that we know are there. We just can't actually access them. How do you approach that, the sort of nuance between those two things in your coaching?
Well, yeah, I mean, I think it's a really important distinction, and I don't think we as a community talk about it enough. I think that there's a lot of literature and articles out there where people just assume it's the, I can't do what I know. And I don't think that's true. First off, we know there's a huge overlap with ADHD and autism. More and more research is emerging. All executive function makes complete sense. The second thing is, a lot of people come up to me, write me emails, write me letters, and they're like, I don't know how to read the room. It is not like I don't want to, I just don't know. So it all goes back to the management system of the brain, executive function. And I think my distinction is first of all, I have questionnaires in the book that help you make this distinction. You don't need me. But I think what's really important is when you're talking to a child or a teen, how good is their self-awareness? How able are they at any given point to read the room and access that? If it's self-regulation, it tends to be that they can, and afterwards they even know what they did. But if it's a lack of self-awareness, everything for them feels like it's out of the blue. This person's mad at me. I don't have any idea why.
I just want to clarify, because if I was to ask my daughter if she could read the room, I don't know if she would know what I meant by that.
Right. That's a really good example. So to read the room is to scan a situation and figure out who is there, what are the expectations of that environment, what body language, social cues, mood, context is telling you what's going on, and then adapting your behavior to mirror the people around you. And so when I talk about adapting and realizing how people are feeling, even little kids can know that. They know that if somebody is really sad, you adapt. But yeah, I mean, little kids, a lot of times they don't know all this language. And so you use visuals, or you teach them. I mean, one of the things I do is I take them to a box store, to a food court, and I show them what it looks like to read the room. And then they have an image, and then they can say, oh, okay, yeah, I don't do that.
Well, my first thought comes to like going into a library, right? Like you're going into a library and you need to read the room that people are quiet, they're studying, they're on computers, they're looking at books. So you're not going to come into that room, talking loudly with your friend I can see giving those kind of examples too, to just, where are you? What's the environment? What's a classroom environment? What's a assembly environment when you go into an assembly? Interesting.
And most kids who can read the room, even if self-regulation gets in their way some of the time, they can tell you things about teachers. They can tell you things about people. They can say to you, my teacher last year was really casual. This year's teacher is not. She's, really anal or whatever. But when a kid can't read the room, it's like they don't have that self-awareness, and they don't have the awareness of what's going on. And a lot of times they'll tell you that nothing happened. Nothing happened that they should have been paying attention to. And so, yeah, I think it is important. The language is important. And I give sometimes in different situations where I'm explaining something in Why Will No One Play With Me, I'll give like different ways you could explain it. But it is something where there is that distinction. Some people can read the room, and then other people can, but they don't have the self-regulation to do it.
And this is different than just that sort of casual teenness, right? Like I'm in this process of having teens with ADHD. And I notice with my daughter who, has been living with it longer and has a greater set of accommodations, that when I say what happened today, I'll be able to probe further after the nothing, and I'll get something, right? I'll get something that she's aware of, and she has some skills to do that. And with my son, who is not quite there yet, I can't get past the nothing. It's like, actually, he didn't store anything in there because he's not calling on any sort of accommodations that he's getting through, or the meds didn't work, or he forgot to take it in the morning, or something like that. And I imagine that is also, for me, living with kids with ADHD is different from, kids without ADHD who are also just teenagers.
Right. Yeah. And I think here's another thing that comes into play. When people don't read the room, my experience is that they're not great noticers. So they don't pick up on not only the social cues, but the context, the environment, the mood. And so one of the things that comes up could be its memory. It could be, its attention. It could be all those things. But it also could be that a lot of times when people don't read the room well, teenagers, little kids, doesn't matter, adults, they don't notice stuff. So a lot of the exercises in Why Will No One Play With Me are geared to turn you into a better noticer, to have you aware that there's context, there's mood, there's stuff going on in every social situation, every box store you enter, every library you enter, and that you need to pay attention to that. And it's almost like one of those billboards you pass on the highway and you've never really read it. And then all of a sudden one day and you're in traffic and you like actually are paused in front of it and you're like, oh, that's what this says. I think when people don't notice, they have never noticed that billboard, even though it's right there.
How do you start with that? Can you give us an example? Like, what are some of the probes that you use to help people become better noticers?
Well, one of the biggest things I do is that I have them become social spies. So I little kids, big kids, adults, I have them learn this thing I call social spy, where they go out into the world with a specific mission of things to notice. And you can use social spy, and we practice and we rehearse so you notice without people noticing that you're noticing, so that we practice and we rehearse so that you can not get caught and nobody knows as a teenager you're watching. But you can use it from everything from what are other kids talking about that maybe want to tune into, or even I have them go to a box store and I want you to notice all the exits. I want you to notice who's in charge, but they're not wearing a uniform or a manager badge. They're in charge, but you can tell they're in charge based on, their bossy behavior. Like, I have them go out and actually collect data, and I ask them to make observations, and it's all scripted out so that they can start to watch and notice all this information. I have them go spy on two members of the family. What does mom and dad do with their body and their voice? And what do they say when they're getting frustrated? And then it's hysterical because they come back with stuff that the parents are like, oh God, but it's
oh my
yeah,
gosh.
right. I was just going to say,
I was spied on.
Yeah, do they ever come back and we're like, well, Coach Caroline, I learned that Uncle Bob is embezzling money from work, and it's all in Switzerland.
Down half of the country.
Right.
I know so many things. They come back with hysterical stuff. They come back with stories, especially the ADHD kids, that you could not make up. And all kinds of information.
I imagine that's a great gift. Like the idea of, what a sort of neurotypical would notice after having just sort of that unconscious, subconscious practice at this, giving an ADHDer the assignment of this sort of social scavenger hunt, the social spy, you're going to get some very unique feedback. The things that they notice, I imagine, are very different.
You are. And sometimes I've had to say, I know that you found your brother's piggy bank or whatever, but I need you to promise, like, today you're going to put it back.
Yeah.
Right.
That's right. Don't take the stuff. Just notice the stuff, right? This isn't a collection.
Exactly.
I have a question about the emotional regulation, because I know, we talk about manage. So manage the emotions rather than let them manage you. So we know that that's a very difficult thing. We just had Dr. Dotson on our show a few weeks ago talking about rejection, sensitivity. So what would be your process in working with a child around that, around managing their emotions? Is it noticing? Again, I mean, I'm thinking.
Yes, it is. So part of it is that and we're not talking about not having emotion, right? We're talking about a few things. We're talking about having an awareness of how big does this feel for me versus how big it really is, right? So how worried should I really be is one of the exercises in Why Will No One Play With Me? And it works for everybody of all ages. But if you can imagine with us, one of the things is that worry feels gigantic. It is a huge distraction. It is all consuming to me. But like perspective wise, it is not a big deal, right? And so part of it is them learning to process that emotion, to name it. So noticing is kind of part of it. To name it, be aware that it's affecting your behavior, and then to process and manage it, and calm yourself down, or realize the rumination is consuming you, and manage it. But also some of it is that perspective, because a lot of kids with ADHD and teens, they feel like the worry feels huge, and then they want all of us to react in concert. And I know my own daughter does this, where she has a missing shirt right now, which I really wish I could find because I'm so done with looking for this shirt. And when she talks about it like it is, famine. It's Syria. And I'm like,
right.
It's a missing t-shirt, but to her, it must feel huge, and it affects her behavior because every morning when she goes to get dressed, it's like this hideous experience for all of us. So that's part of it, right? Because then if they can name it and they can tame it and they can process it, and they can also know when they're going into fight, flight, and freeze, or when they're losing self-regulation, it's so much easier to help them because they're aware versus when they think Like, you should be just as worried about this as I am, because this is huge.
Mm-hmm.
It makes me think of all the times that I hear from my children, you just don't understand, Mom. You just don't understand. But I see now that, maybe I didn't understand, but I certainly understand more now because that's what's happening is they're having a hard time managing their emotions, and it feels big to
Yeah.
them.
And I think anxiety is not something we talk about as much as we could in our space, because a lot of the kids that I work with, they actually can read social cues, but their anxiety and their worries are so all consuming that they it's like they're in a frantic state at all times. They're in fight, flight, or freeze at all times, and they cannot even hear people. And any of us with self-regulation issues listening who have experienced that, it is like you're inside this maelstrom, and people are going on with their lives, and you're supposed to behave in a certain way, but it's like you can't. You're just frantic.
In your book, you actually have a definition of what it means to have a social problem. Can you talk to us about how you define that? So the parents out there that are listening, because I know as a parent, I don't always know. Well, I hardly ever know what's really going on with my teenagers. I only know what they tell me. So how do you define that to somebody so that they really understand?
If something is persistently coming up, to me, it's a problem. Like, I have parents write me and who I've worked with who spend almost every night dealing with all of this social issues, dealing with who they sat with at lunch, who they didn't sit with, who looked at them cross-eyed. They may have good social skills, but that's an issue, right? Because think ahead to the workplace in the future. You as a parent are calming them down. You're helping them manage. What's going to happen when you're not there? Is their college roommate going to do that? I very much doubt that, right? So that's one.
Right.
Two is, are they persistently left out? So in 1975, people had 5 to 6 friends. Nowadays, people have 5 to 6 friends. So if your child is persistently left out, or they only have virtual friends, that is definitely an issue. And definitely don't wait, because the brain is most plastic when they're young. So we can help anyone, but it's easier when they're young. And then the last thing is, are they able to do those 7 things in an age appropriate way? And if they're not, it's not the end of the world, but you need those 7 things to be successful in the workplace. And no matter what you do, someone said to me the other day, well, my kid's not, going to go to college. And I said, okay, but like, if you're an Uber driver, you have to get along with people. If you're working in a pizza shop, wherever you work, you have to get along with people, and you have to be able to not alienate them and, not say wildly inappropriate things. So those 7 things, it doesn't matter what your child does, as long as they're going to be in the workplace of some kind, they're going to need those 7 things.
I want to anchor on something you just said there about 5 to 6 friends. First of all, can you elaborate on why it's important for kids to develop those friendships when they do? And I'm assuming that that's important. And by extension, does that carry through to adults because we hear this all the time, like adults have trouble making friends, keeping friends for whatever reason. They're just not able to maintain that sort of social consciousness around their friendships. Can you talk about those 2 things?
Yeah, I mean, there's a few things here. One is that you're touching on is sometimes people have friendly behaviors, but they don't follow up with people and they don't keep in touch. And a lot of the 12, 13, 14-year-olds that I work with, the issue isn't that they are, not able to be friendly and make friends. The issue is that when parents are no longer facilitating the friendship, they don't follow through, they don't reach out, and that's a big issue. But yeah, 5 to 6 friends, why it's important is just actually, to me, is like a baseline. So a lot of times when I give a talk, somebody raises their hand and says, my child is an introvert, or my child seems pretty happy. I worry, but they only have 1 to 2 friends. And so And the big other thing is virtual friends. Kids are telling us, oh, you don't understand. I have virtual friends. And so I wanted to figure out, like, do kids really have more virtual friends, and we're just putting a standard on it from our past? And it's like, no, even kids who have virtual friends have live friends. The other thing is that when a child has 1 to 2 friends, they may be really thinking of close friends, but the thing is, can they make more, right? So I'm not here to tell you who you should be friends with, but what you have to be able to do if one of those 2 friends moves away is make more friends. So, I mean, that's why it's important.
Or you move away. Right. Oh, wow. That's a really interesting connection.
Yeah. I have a ton of kids who I see or who I have heard from who had 1 or 2 friends, and the parents were like, well, they're very close to these 2 people. Who am I to say? Except there's a problem with that, which is that if one person moves away, or if your kid only has 1 or 2 friends and they don't get placed with them in a high school or something, and they can't make new friends, that's a problem. And also, I like to project to the workplace. You're going to have a million bosses. We know people are going to have 7 or more careers nowadays. You're going to, we're in the world of mergers. Like, you're not going to have one boss. You might even have dotted line to many bosses. So if you want to have 1 or 2 close friends, and you don't, that's fine, as long as you can make other friends. And in most cases, people aren't able to, is sort of what ends up happening. So that's my big thing.
Well, and that's really the question, right? As an adult, what is it that is sort of trapping you in this space of not being able to make new friends? And I would extend that by saying it just feels like there is a sense of, or a sort of lack of momentum, lack of, like, you get this established kind of inertia toward not going out and socializing, or going out and socializing because you're dragged there with your spouse or whatever. And it's so much easier to not make an effort to make new friends as an adult. And you just have less opportunity to do it, given the daily buckle shuffle of life. And it seems like that, we say, well, it's healthy for kids to have great friends. Well, I just feels like, doesn't the same thing hold as for adults? Not just being able to make new friends, but nourishment.
Absolutely. And, it's funny because I know this intellectually. I don't know if this happens to you guys. You know something, but then you hear it again and you're like, oh, that's so true. Ned Hollowell's book that's coming out next year, I'm in that book as a social solution. And the reason I'm in that book is that one of the big things he's going to talk about is connection again. And there's more and more evidence that you as a human being must connect, or you end up with depression and other things that actually affect your lifespan and affect your physical well-being. And the thing is that I think for a lot of adults with ADHD, there is that inertia. I think there's also I don't know how, so I'm going to, I just don't do it. And I think it requires executive function, right? Because you have to plan, so there's all these factors, but at the end of the day, it is important to connect with other people and to reach out.
It's terrifying, and it's a muscle like anything else. You have to practice, and I think we forget that. I know I do. I forget that, and I'm in this space, speaking just for myself, where I work out of my house. I see, the social relationships that I have are predominantly like us doing this right now. We're on the microphone. We're talking to each other. We have the luxury of being able to look at each other, but there's something very different about that. If you get out of the habit of leaving your office and going out to lunch with somebody that you don't have, something to take notes at the same time, like it's not a working lunch. That's something that takes practice, and it's hard to do, and it's okay for it to be hard to do.
Yeah, it is okay for it to be hard to do. Everything we're talking about means exiting your comfort zone. It really does. And one of the things I would say too is an introverted person taught me this years ago, and I've been using it ever since. where one of the ways that this person was able to overcome a lot of social anxiety was to have a job to do. And so what he did was he volunteered for things. So, just having a role, if you're a waiter, your part of your role is to talk to people. And so when you have a job and that's part of your role, then it gives you kind of an excuse and a way to do this as an adult. And one of the things that I've found over the years is that volunteering is actually an incredibly good way to expand your social network as an adult. And it doesn't feel as daunting and scary as, why don't you go out and find a new group of friends when you work from home, or you work at a small company, or you work with people who are completely not your age, right? Instead, we're saying go out and find an organization, find some different groups and join as a volunteer, and you're going to meet tons of people. Plus you have a job and a role. It's not like, well, why are you talking to me? It's like, oh, we're all doing this.
Totally.
Well, and you already, right. And you have a mission to get, you already have something in common is what I'm trying to say, right? So whether you're volunteering at your child's school, you are looking for the well-being of your children, their classmates and the school, and you're helping out the school. But I can also see if you're helping out at, the pet,
like adoption agencies,
humane society. Yeah, right. So now you're connecting with people who love animals just as much as you love animals. And so you could already start that conversation. Really, right?
Yeah. And I just was finding, what, my husband does the finances and all this stuff for our church. And, there's people of all different ages involved in this church. And my husband is pretty social, but I was in town with him the other day and he knows everybody. Everyone's talking to him. And I'm like, how do you know a 90-year-old man? Right. And he's like, well,
right.
He does X. Right. And so it gives you access also to all different age groups, which I don't know about any of the other ADDers listening, but I'm an old soul. So when I was in my 20s, I wasn't necessarily going to go out and party a ton. And I didn't necessarily relate to other 20-year-olds. So there's that's what I like about it too, is that you become more about friendship and less about your particular age group or your particular, town or whatever. You get to meet a wide variety of people. And again, it's less daunting because honestly, if I say to someone, hey, Pete, go out and meet new people.
Oh, yeah, forget it. Also, I could go out and meet my Xbox.
Right, exactly.
So there are other things I could do.
Me, Pete.
Right, that's right. I could just call Nikki and every time. That's that social sort of making socialization a part of your kind of obligation, whether it's your obligation to your church community or obligation to, the food bank or whatever it is, that volunteerism, I think, it's really great. I have to talk right now, and that lets me sort of pull back the veil on my insecurities and makes it easier to do. I love it. All of this stuff is great, Caroline. It's always fantastic. You want to, as we wrap up, you want to tell people now officially where they need to go find this book of yours and all of the great tools in it.
Sure. Why Will No One Play With Me? If you want to Google just Why Will No One Play With Me, if you're a person who's going to forget what I'm about to say, you can do that. But also, if you go to CarolineMaguireAuthor.com, that will lead you to literally a page where you can buy it from anyone. Why Will No One Play With Me is on Amazon. I have a ton of new stuff coming up, including Black Friday and other offerings of videos on how to coach your kid, webinars, all kinds of educational information. So while CarolineMaguireAuthor.com is one of the best ways to do all this because it's like a portal. I really hope people will try and, I know it's a lot of work, but here's my sales pitch. The holidays are incredibly social. So if you want to work on social skills for yourself or your kid, you have a million built-in opportunities, and you can either slog through them filled with dread, watching your kid do stuff and, kind of dying 1,000 deaths. And we've all been there. or you can pick up Why Will No One Play With Me, and this could be like an opportunity, because there's I don't know about your calendars, but my calendars come Thanksgiving on are just filled with even just, the kids' choral stuff and all this stuff where you are being social and therefore you can practice.
Yeah. And I just have to say again, as a recommendation, going through this book, you give the language to the parents, you give them the exercises, you give them the questions, and it's just fantastic. So I highly recommend it to everybody. Everyone.
Thank you.
You bet.
We will, of course, have links in the show notes to all of those fantastic places if you haven't gone out there and Googled them already. And thank you, as always, Carolyn Maguire, for joining us today. It's so great to have you back on the show.
Thank you.
And thank you, everybody, for downloading and listening to this show. As always, on behalf of Caroline Maguire and Nikki Kinzer, I'm Pete Wright. And we'll see you next time right here on Taking Control, the ADHD podcast.